Well, welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening. This is the foundation course, and we're working our way through Volume 1 of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. These are what Trungpa Rinpoche, the author, called the foundational teachings, the Hinayana teachings. And so tonight, Barry and Philip are going to do the chapter. It's a very long chapter. So, gentlemen, take it away.
Okay, shall we start with the bow? Would you like to join me? So, we're working our way through the foundations of mindfulness, and now we're on to mindfulness of mind. To start with, he says that it's a self-conscious awareness of what is happening to us as we sit and meditate. So simple. And like much of these teachings, it really is. But the self-conscious awareness is actually enlightened perception, the perception of the enlightened mind. And it is the simple awareness of what is. And we all have this, that each of us right now is aware in this moment of what's happening. You're aware of these words, the screen in front of you, the room you're in, anything else you may be experiencing. You don't have to think about it. It just is. You know it. And this kind of knowing, this kind of awareness is mindfulness of mind. He says mindfulness of mind is being watchful rather than watching. So there's no need to work on it, to watch out for it, to try to achieve it. It is more relaxing into the immediate experience of what is. Now, here. And he says it has both lightheartedness and balance. It is like opening the window and doors and opening the windows and doors a bit and allowing freshness from outside. You see, these habitual discursive thoughts that occupy us most of the time, most of our lives, are not particularly pleasant. That there can be a very kind of claustrophobic quality to all of this, that a kind of a dullness or maybe tunnel vision. So when you come out of these thoughts and come back into moments of awareness, it is like letting in the fresh air. So now, without mind, he says, you cannot meditate or develop balance. Without conflicts of mind, you cannot develop anything at all. This kind of stopped me in my tracks when I first read it. But if there are no conflicts, then no conflicts of mind, then you're either asleep or enlightened. That this is what comes up for us. And it's by working with these conflicts, by becoming aware of them and seeing them, then you can make them part of the practice. And in that way, you can begin to develop the understanding and knowing and intelligence to actually come into that state of mindfulness of mind. That shifting from the preoccupation of ordinary mind to open awareness again and again. You see, it's this shifting in and out of it that's at the heart of meditation. The instruction is when you become aware that you're lost in thought, come back to the breath, come back to this moment. So we're coming in and out of this all of the time. I think of it like a fish has no concept of water until it leaves the water and returns. And so it is this leaving and returning, this contrast that becomes clearer and clearer to us as we go along. So he says everything could be worked at, everything could be worked with in that way. The point is to maintain your discipline so you are not constantly lost in daydreams, but at the same time, you keep a quality of freshness and wakeful mindfulness. Now, the definition of mindfulness, he says, mindfulness of mind, is being with the mind. When you sit, you're there. You are being with your mind. So it is being, not doing. It is simply being there with your mind, with whatever is happening. It says if you are not there, you might miss yourself, but that could be a double take. In that realizing you are not there means you are there. So you are brought back to square one. And I used to think of this as a little secret, a trick, that as we meditate, thinking, returning to awareness, to the breath, seeking that elusive no thought or some kind of experience, that it's actually happening every time we come back in that moment. As soon as we realize that we're thinking, that's mindfulness of mind. It's the awareness of what's happening. What's happening is we're lost in thought. And he says, mindfulness is a very simple matter. It only concerns that very small area where you are. I think he says in here, it's like you're a grain of sand. You're this little dot. It's where you are now, not past or future. You're not coming back to the last breath or the next breath. It's not memories or dreams. It's this little dot of now. As he says, this dot of existence called nowness. And he has spoken of this as being on the dot, and that means being here. So, now, this has some importance. People may think of meditation as getting into a state of trance and being so completely high and so absorbed in such a state that you're uncertain of whether you are coming or going. So now many of us have learned and understood this important point, that the idea here with meditation is not about achieving any kind of trance state. It's actually not about achieving, really. But there can be a subtle residue, even with that understanding, a subtle residue of that attitude. Maybe a lingering expectation that meditation is how we can achieve perfect mindfulness, possibly go on to enlightenment. So those kinds of preoccupations, and especially trance states, are not desirable. There's something to be acknowledged and move on. And a little later in the chapter, Philip will be going into the trance states, actually. No, he won't go into a trance state. He'll be talking about them. So it is actually knowing what is happening, he says, that makes the difference between that idea of a trance and the idea of meditation, of this meditation, which is very realistic. So, and he goes on, that is why the fourth foundation of mindfulness plays an extremely important role. It's understanding that it's all about coming back to this. I mean, that keeps being said over and over again, but it really is the heart of it all, is being present to this moment. And he says mindfulness of mind is very personal experience. It is very revealing. And such experience is your experience alone. This is a good point, that each of us live on our own experience of reality. And each of us have our own understandings. And each of us come to this teaching in our own way, and each of us find our own way in the course of the Dharma. And as we continue to meditate and become more aware of our state of mind, of what is going on in this mind of ours, that some of that stuff may not be something you're entirely comfortable with seeing. Things can come up that you would like to just turn away from or bat away. But by seeing it and by remaining present to all of it, that we can make friends with ourselves in a way that most of us never have. That seeing all of it with mindfulness of mind, seeing it, not turning away. In this way, meditation is actually a courageous act, is being willing to remain, to be here on the dot, open, experiencing everything that comes up. Now he says, two things cannot happen at once. Your journey back and forth may be very speedy, going in and out of your thoughts. But even then, you are doing one thing at a time. You are jumping back and forth rather than being in two places at once, which is impossible. Mindfulness of mind slows down that fickleness. And he says mindfulness of mind is not exactly a discipline. It instead, it is the end result of mindfulness practice. The end result of mindfulness practice. Mindfulness of effort could be said to be the gardening, that mindfulness of effort, which we covered in the previous chapter, could be said to be the gardening that brings it about. So mindfulness of mind is the result of strict discipline, he says. And this language at times can be very, strict discipline can sound kind of harsh. So it's good to keep in mind that all of this is done gently, be kind to yourself. So, in other words, it means stick with it, just do it. I mean, it's called practice for a reason. Sit, meditate, return the attention to now, again and again, and relax. The meditator should be like a rock in the mountains. A rock is never tired of being a rock. It lives through the snows, the rains, and the four seasons. And this is something that we can begin to develop as more and more it becomes a kind of new habit or habitual pattern, that as thoughts rise, come and go, more and more you can really settle in to simply being here like a rock. Now he says that you may want to surrender your ego, your hang-ups, your problems, and commit yourself to the discipline with exertion. But often, when you give in to a discipline, you begin to pick up something else. And so renunciation, surrendering, that in itself can become a project. I must apply myself diligently to surrendering myself. I'm struggling with renunciation. That, in these chants we do, renunciation is the foot of meditation, as is taught. And it's also part of taking refuge, which I know several people here are going to be taking refuge soon, which is great. But anything like this is not a project. Renunciation, it could be something that you can start to turn it into a project. You make it a thing. It becomes real. It's something you're working on. So it's just another thing to let go. He says, in the case of mindfulness of mind, surrendering means being on the dot. You are even surrendering any notion of surrendering. There is nothing but this existence. Now, he talks here about the transcendental watcher. Mindfulness of mind is based on the somewhat glorified watcher, a transcendental or divine watcher, as opposed to the ordinary watcher. And in the last chapter of Mindfulness of Effort, we talked about self-consciousness, about ordinary self-consciousness or enlightened self-consciousness. But transcendental watcher is the same as what was referred to as the abstract watcher in the last chapter. He says the ordinary watcher is simply the state of consciousness that watches what is happening within it, takes note of it, evaluates it, and tries to compare whether it is good or bad, etc. So this is the watcher that is seemingly always there, commenting, judging, evaluating, categorizing, whatever you become aware of. Am I doing this right? Ooh, look at that cool car, that beautiful dress. Ooh, that beautiful person, that ugly person. I don't like the looks of him, her. That this is all the ordinary watcher. In contrast, he says, the transcendental watcher is simply self-conscious. It is simply being aware and conscious of what is happening completely and totally. So this is the watcher that knows you are here, lost in thought, and now you're back. Like waking up in the morning. You know that you were dreaming, and now you're awake. Then the ordinary watcher kicks in. Do I have to get up now? Those were interesting dreams. What am I going to do today? I don't feel so good. You see? But we have those moments of that transcendental watcher, of just knowing. It's just knowingness. So he says, I think he says, hold on. The best way you can begin to practice this mindfulness of mind, is to be aware of what you're doing. There is no other way than that. From there, you begin to develop more space. So once again, it's just knowing. Then this is the essence of mindfulness. In meditation, in daily life, knowing that you are thinking, knowing that you are awake, knowing where you are. Just be there, then disown, touch, and go. And we did talk about this earlier. You know that you're here, but it's not something you can grasp. It's like in that instant of knowing, you're already here. It's touch and go. They're simultaneous. And he gives an example. You might see that you're washing a dish. You see it, that's it. Disown it. In other words, you see it, you become aware that you're seeing it, and then disown that awareness. Right? Don't cling to it. Just continue. You just continue because everything is changing all the time. We're always trying to freeze reality, but it's always changing. He says this dish, just continue, do it properly, then look at yourself doing it properly, go ahead and see yourself rinse, and then put them away. Just look at yourself. Look. In other words, just see. So at this point, we're getting back to effort. And you might say, welcome back. That because effort is, the whole last chapter was about mindfulness of effort. But it's good to have a really clear understanding of what's meant by effort as one of these words that's easily and frequently confused, right? And has different meanings depending on where you are. Now, he says effort comes into practice at the beginning and at the end, and during occasionally. So, applying effort to remain focused doesn't actually work here. That would be striving to achieve something. And of course, that means that I am trying to maintain focus or accomplish this, etc. But this is not a project. It's being, not doing. That you are being effortful rather than actually meditating. So in meditating, something other than effort is happening. An alternating, shifting situation is taking place. And it's the gentle effort of paying attention. And it happens in those moments of awareness when we realize that we have drifted away. If you are 100% effortful, you blow the whole thing. There's nothing left but a lump of tense muscle sitting in the middle of a field. So at the beginning, pushing yourself to practice takes effort. During the practice, you occasionally check that you are still keeping up with it. So once again, a light touch. This is just knowing. Now, if meditation becomes a project, something that requires unwavering attention, maintaining perfect posture, then we're solidifying it. Sitting here, batting away thoughts and feelings like buzzing flies, holding on to, what are we holding on to? See, we are making it a thing that has real continuous existence, you see, and that's not real. He says, you may try to make effort continuous and solid like a pipe running through the ground, but it is not solid. So meditation isn't a thing. It is a practice. And our experience of that practice is always changing, moment to moment, year to year. So effort in the Buddhist tradition of meditation is based on an enormous trust in impermanence. Nothing is continuous, but just let it be that way. Death and birth are taking place moment to moment. Let us work with that rather than work towards eternity. And there it is. Impermanence, of course, is a big topic in Buddhism, but it's simply not, avoid trying to solidify anything. It is always changing. Your experience will always change. Every moment is changing. So he says, finally, this particular technique of Buddhist meditation allows a certain amount of subconscious gossip. Now, in other words, our discursive thoughts may still be there on some level. That's okay. And it's worth pointing out here that, most of us aren't quite there yet. And it's good to remember that these teachings are frequently aspirational, pointing the way so that we can recognize it when we get there. And John may want to comment on this, but I believe that he is often describing his own experience from an enlightened point of view. So finally, he says, while still being fully mindful and steady, ongoing and patient, it is keeping track of the sitting practice of meditation and the techniques that have developed. So, in other words, just do it. Stick with it. Just do it. Now, hand this off to Philip.
Thank you, Barry. That was great. Let's entertain questions on this part at this point, because the chapter shifts focus sort of abruptly when we get to the niyams. So Paul has a question for you.
Oh, yes.
So my question, I don't know, maybe because I've been away for a week and in the sky for a few hours at a time, I've sort of lost touch with a certain experience, although I have been meditating. In today's meditation was to follow the breath, as this has been said before, to follow the breath out, in the sense of out of my experience of the body and into space. So am I projecting my sensory experience into space, something beyond myself? And then I would couple that question with mindfulness of mind, minding that I have a mind or there is mind, and I'm not just minding thoughts. I'm not minding physical sensations, any of the five senses, but just minding, sort of like a computer disk without a program running at the time.
Well, first of all, I'm just wondering, Philip or John might have something to offer here.
Yeah. I'd like to contribute here. If you could just bring your attention here into the present moment. I would say, if you wish, take a meditation posture. It's a gesture to awareness. Just straighten up. And your eyes are open. You can hear my voice effortlessly. Doesn't take any effort. And whatever you're seeing visually, again, no effort is required. It's all here, happening. Whatever presents itself to you through the five senses and your mind. This effortlessness is the key to this mindfulness of mind, he's calling it. He's really describing a very profound aspect of our being, that we're constantly in this state of awareness. We just get distracted from time to time by thoughts, mental events. But as they pass, here we are. You can't shut it off. And coming back to this, that's what's meant by the transcendental watcher. That's what he means. It's not really a watcher. It's just the fact that you know, I'm here. It's very simple. He says, this technique of meditation allows a certain amount of subconscious gossip. That means some thoughts simply taking note of what is happening at this very moment. What's happening at this very moment? We're all sitting here, we're listening to this guy speaking. You can say that to yourself, and then it goes. It's just like skywriting, it appears in the sky and then it's gone. Meanwhile, the sky never goes, and everything in it. The clouds, the sun, the blue. This is what he's talking about, this mindfulness of mind. It's coming back to this fundamental awareness that everybody has. And just coming back to it, but it's not that it's a virtue. It's simply being aware that it's there. It's not like, oh, I'm bad, I was thinking. That's another good thought. You let that go. So he says, allows a certain amount of subconscious gossip. I was thinking, I was not thinking, whatever it might be, whatever you want to think about, where those thoughts come, and then they go. And here we are again. Again and again, the technique is to acknowledge this simple, effortless awareness.
Thank you.
Yeah, what he's doing here is really interesting from my perspective. If you listen to other Buddhist teachers teaching this, it'll sound very different because he's teaching this from a very advanced point of view. That's what he always did. He has great faith in us that we will understand it and get something out of it. But this clarity that's here all the time, we just come back to it. It's a part of our being. It's really quite lovely. And then if you say, oh, I'm coming back to this clarity, that's fine. Because then it just goes, be kind to yourself. You don't have to be critical. So I'll stop now.
Thanks for that, John. I was a little confused by that part. Fred? Oops, you just muted.
Oh, I didn't unmute. I think John answered the question I had, but it was, he talks about, Rinpoche says that there's a tremendous sense of space, but then there's also something you can't escape from as well. And then it seems to be contradictory, but I think John just explained that. And I don't know if there's any more to it than that.
I think you just said it. Whoops, you just said it beautifully. There's a term in the more advanced teachings that applies here. It's called, in Tibetan, it's rang rik. And the way that translates, rang is self, and rik is pure awareness. Pure awareness. It's the awareness we're talking about here. That is always going on. And rang rik is always present. It gets covered over when we get lost in a dream, a thought, but it's never gone. And it's the fundamental nature of what we are. Sometimes they just call it rikpa, but when they want to emphasize that it's effortless, they call it rang rik, self-awareness, because it's already here. It's who we are. It's ourself. This. Can't shut it off. It's everywhere. And that's what we come back to. We notice when we get lost in thoughts, and then we say, oh, I was thinking, we're back in this. And it's not like there's a better way to be. It's just noticing it. If we treat it as a better way to be, then we're hard on ourselves. And that's not good. Then you get caught up in that self-improvement program.
Well, should we continue? Oh, Paul, you have something else?
Just one other question. There was a part there you said that if we when we have no conflict, I think you said, and then if we had no conflicts, nothing would be accomplished, or I think I misunderstood it. I'm not sure if I'm reading it right. Do you remember what part it was?
Yes, yes, yes. Right. He said without mindfulness, there could be no meditation, and without conflicts of mind, there would be nothing to work with. There would be nothing at all. It's the thing is, if our experience of mindfulness is, oh, okay, return the attention to the breath, relax, and just be here, and we could just do that. Okay. But it's the kind of conflicts that come up, the struggles that happen, that, we have self doubts, we have this, we have, things. This is all kinds of stuff comes up for us. It's working with those. I'm starting to recognize the kinds of things that we get drawn into, these internal debates, these, different ideas, those struggles that we have, that you can begin to see those things happening as they're happening. They can become part of your practice. And you can, in other words, most of that we're not really aware of normally. It's just sort of what happens up here.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Philip?
Okay, so the chapter takes a turn here and begins to explore another area, temporary meditative experiences, nyam. This section of the chapter you could call warnings and stories. Nyam is a Tibetan word. It means a temporary flash of experience. Jamgon Költrön, who's one of the major influences for Chogyam Trungpa, like Chalak Rinpoche, who we just studied, many of us, makes this distinction. He says, experiences are temporary and realizations are permanent. So you want to etch that in stone. Experiences are temporary, realizations are permanent. Experience is like the mist over a mountain. Realization is like the mountain itself. Nyam is a temporary experience. Nyam can be experienced both on and off the cushion. So Chogyam Trungpa says, in everything one does, bare attention should always be paid to what is happening. This kind of awareness practice is very important in everyday life, even more so than in meditation, which is a somewhat artificial situation. So it's like this light touch, just this constant awareness, being here now, what we've just been talking about. He says, Chogyam Trungpa says, it's important not to hold on to nyam in any kind of stiff way. Instead, as you go about life, when you experience a sudden flash of awareness, you disown it. You don't hold on to it. In that way, you don't allow everything to become rigid. In other words, there's a flash of awareness of now, and then you let things flow. A flash of awareness of now, and then you let things flow. In everyday life, there is a light touch of that and this, awareness of now, then let things flow, which constantly reminds us to recollect a sense of being. This is just what Barry's been talking about. We're human beings. We often say we let go, but it would be better to say, I think, let be, just let be, let things be. And then there's this interesting thing. There's a Tibetan warning against engaging with nyam, lest you turn them into demons. So we'll come back to that. The takeaways so far are these. Don't get stuck on nyam, and don't mistake them for the real thing. They are temporary meditative experiences. And then we get into the details. The next section is called 5 Basic Nyam. So in the old pre-literate days, nothing was written down, and Buddhists had to memorize everything. Consequently, there are a lot of lists. You've probably already noticed this. Here's the list for Niyam. There are 5 basic Niyam relating to physical or psychophysical sensations, and 3 further, more fundamental categories relating to states of being or states of mind, making 8 altogether. All are temporary experiences. None are true realizations. So you'll notice as we go through these that the first 5 niyama are a progression. They're a gradual slowing of the mind related to the taming of the mind. And the first 5 have poetic names. The first is brook on a steep hill. This refers to the speed and movement in your mind. This niyam is very busy, like water rushing down from the hills with no resistance, no turbulence, none whatsoever. The second is called turbulent river. Your mind is like a turbulent river in a gorge between 2 rocky valleys, with waves hitting all kinds of big stones. The second niyam has an appreciation of its existence. It's very speedy, very fast, but also quite nonchalant. The third is called slowly flowing river. The thought processes that go on in your mind have become familiar and easy to live with. You are familiar with what's happening in your practice. No particular problems, no particular speediness, smooth. Number 4, ocean without waves. This 4th niyam is the experience of absolute stillness, meditative absorption. Number 5, candle undisturbed by the wind. This 5th niyam is a reconfirmation of the accomplishment of the 4th. It confirms that what you have experienced as stillness is real stillness. All 5 of these niyam are just experiences that occur in your state of mind, rather than one state of mind being higher or more spiritual than another. So there are no differences, Chogyam Trungpa says. None whatsoever, absolutely not. These are all just temporary experiences. Then we move into the 3 fundamental niyam, and things get more interesting. He says, the 3 fundamental niyam denote the progress you are making. Although the experiences themselves are by no means permanent. You are still not arriving at or achieving a permanent state of realization. These temporary experiences are more like landmarks of one's growth, one's spiritual path, and one's meditation. But then he says, it is very tricky if you try to recreate them. They are temporary, so you cannot hold on to them. And yet they are sort of indicators that you're making progress. At the same time, if you try to hold on to them, you get stuck. That brings us back to this Tibetan warning, right? Against engaging with niyam, lest you turn them into demons. So what are these 3? The first is bliss or joy. In Tibetan, it's called dua. It is completely refreshing, and there is a feeling of absolute well-being. Physically, tingling sensations and pulsations may happen in the body. Psychologically, there are little twinkling flashes of light and joy and feelings of being good, extremely cheerful, and highly inspired. In everyday life, you might feel that you can do anything you want and do it beautifully. Everything is inspired. In comparison, he says, in the second foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of life, the quality of well-being is not all that dramatic. In this first fundamental niyam, the experience of bliss is romantic and flimsy. It has a flowing quality. In sitting practice, your experience is a tremendously pleasant one of radiating love and kindness to everyone. It feels extraordinarily rewarding to sit in practice, and you feel that you are worthy to be here. The first fundamental niyam includes all these extraordinarily good and absolutely splendid feelings. However, there's always a but, right? However, the experience of bliss could be an obstacle if you regarded it as permanent. If you feel that everything comes along very easily, thoroughly, and smoothly, there's no room for effort. It's exactly what Barry was just talking about. Therefore, you have to come back to the fourth foundation of mindfulness practice, the mindfulness of mind. So, a second fundamental niyam, luminosity. In Tibetan, this is selva, means luminosity, brilliant light or clarity. It means that you're able to work with a tremendous amount of energy. You're able to create a link between your body and your mind, a link between your psyche and your physical existence. You feel very able, extraordinarily able, in the sense that you could order the universe. You're able to make things workable. There's tremendous confidence in light, a far-seeing quality, panoramic vision. Number 3, non-thought. In Tibetan, mitokpa. Not so much being without thoughts, Chogyam Trungpa says, but rather a quality of stillness, solidity and stillness that does not want to move. Any experience that occurs in your mind is very still and solid. Nothing happens. He says, this niyam could bring tremendous depression. You can feel there is no forward movement. It is difficult to summon energy. You just want to stay in one spot. At the same time, he says, this niyam could sometimes lead to a state without thoughts. You are not excited or depressed. There are no thoughts, no irritations. But note, you are not getting into a trance-like state of meditative absorption here, although there is a quality of stillness and solidity. So over and over and over and over and over, we're given these warnings. They're temporary. Don't get hooked. Chogyam Trungpa says, like the first 5 basic niyam, these 3 fundamental niyam are all temporary experiences. The idea is not to dispel these experiences, nor to cultivate them, but just to acknowledge them. Whenever any extraordinary experience occurs, you could relate to it simply as a temporary experience, or niyam. That seems to be the point. Further thoughts on niyam. This is where we start getting into the stories, and I'm going to read this one on Gampopa and Milarepa. It's just one paragraph on page 326. It goes like this. There is a story about the great Kagyu meditation master Gampopa experiencing such niyam when he was studying with the yogi poet Milarepa. He kept running back and forth between his cave and his teacher Milarepa's cave, reporting all the experiences and visions that he had. And Gampopa was very tricky. When Milarepa said, now perhaps you should go back to your cave, Gampopa interpreted that as, Milarepa said that now I should go back. Every other time I went back, he said, go back. But this time he said, now you should go back. Maybe that means that the next time, whatever occurs to me might be valuable and real, because he said now, which he didn't say before. But even for someone like Gampopa, such experiences were only temporary and could not be sustained. Chogyam Trungpa talks a little more about niyam. He says, niyam are not quite like hallucinations or illusions. Hallucinations are ungrounded. Niyam are very grounded. You simply experience things in those ways. A person could feel extraordinarily sane and solid and meditative and still experience niyam. Niyam are very direct, very immediate. A niyam is a direct experience rather than a hallucination. But it's not a realization. The ordinary experiences people feel, their depressions and excitements and everything, are more or less on the level of the first 5 niyams. In the last 3, something more is happening. than purely pulsations in your state of mind. Chogyam Trungpa says they are not permanent, but they are somewhat more solid than the first five. They are semi-permanent. Experiencing these three is a mark of some effort on the path. But another warning, he says, a lot of people are deceived by these three fundamental niyam, thinking they are permanent. He says, as an example, in any kind of intensive practice situation, like a long-term retreat, he means, people could get to the level of these three niyam. People may regard what they experience as enlightenment, but that experience only lasts for a few days after the people leave their intensive practice situations. And then he ties things up. The next section is conclusion and summary, the fourth foundation of mindfulness. He says, the fourth foundation of mindfulness is the measure of intelligence that covers all our meditative experiences and keeps track so that we will not be led astray by such extraordinary experience, such as niyam. The fourth foundation of mindfulness, or you could call it the transcendental watcher, purely looks at the present situation. It does not speculate about the past or future. It looks at what is happening at this moment. And he talks about memory a little bit. He says, from that perspective, memory is also a present experience. Memory means that you're currently looking at a past version of the present mind. Memory means that you're currently looking at a past version of the present mind. He goes on, in mindfulness of mind, the point is that the present situation is a clear situation, a free situation. The present situation is freedom, as well as the potentiality of freedom. That brings us to the end of the chapter and the end of my notes. There are a couple of stories I've heard from John, and some of you have too, over the years about niyam. So I want to just introduce those and let John clean up afterwards. The first is an old story, and it relates to a lama whose job was to search from cave to cave, looking for meditated yogis who had gotten stuck on some niyam or another, sometimes for years. They'd be frozen in full lotus position, sort of like petrified wood or something. And the teacher's job was to kick the yogis over and wake them up. That's one story. A second one I've heard from John is much more recent. It relates to his time as a young man, and he talks of a student of Trungpa Rinpoche from the early Sangha, who one day packed up his suitcase and left, announcing to everyone that he had gained enlightenment. And and he didn't need to meditate anymore. He just went home. And I think that might be an example of experience versus realization. So I'll turn this over to John if he wants to follow up on those, and to the rest of you for questions and comments.
I have no comment further. I thought that you did fine.
So they're interesting, aren't they? They're encouraging and discouraging at once. They are, among other things, an indication that you're making progress along the path, especially those last three. On the other hand, they have the potential to be a real trap.
Yeah, it's to seduce us into thinking we've accomplished something, because they are temporary.
I would just like to say, in my own experience, I've had at least one experience of that was really strong, and it was a problem that trying to kind of figure out what the heck was going on, because I thought I had really gone someplace else. So I didn't have that good an understanding at the time that, yeah, this is Nyam, okay, and it was enjoyable, so enjoy it.
Yeah, I think the lesson here and the message to take is that we can have these very pleasurable experiences and not to take them too seriously. They come and they go. But they are also sort of a hallmark of progress on the path that we are actually practicing and doing things with our minds. Fred?
And they mentioned the story of Milarepa and Gampopa and his experience. And I got a question about Milarepa and Marpa, where Milarepa snuck off to learn with another teacher, and then he wasn't getting any of the signs. And I'm just curious about that. How would that even come about? Where, is it a lack of bad connection with the teacher, or I don't know, some obscuration? No.
I don't know.
Okay.
A lot of reasons. But he obviously had a very strong connection with Marpa. And that connection is really the essence for all of us. Connection with a particular lineage, people, the teachings come home. I wanted to go back to something earlier in the chapter that was meaningful, I felt for me. He talks about when you have a flash of awareness, when you come back, and suddenly we're right here, effortlessly. And then you notice it, and you might say, oh, this is self-awareness, Ranrik, or whatever you want to call it, mindfulness. Here it is. And then there's a feeling of trying to hold it. That's what you don't do. You disown it. Again and again, you experience this awareness, and then you disown it. You let it go. That's what he's saying. This is the technique. This is the practice. We come back to awareness, and we don't make it a personal possession. We let it go, disown it, which actually makes us feel really much lighter, easier. Not as, because when you try and hold on to it, you can't. And then there's this feeling of failure. So you see it and then let it go. Disown
I
it.
like that. I like that word disown.
Me too.
It's like you don't own it.
Yes, and he ends this whole chapter with this thought: the present situation is freedom, as well as the potentiality of freedom.
Yeah. The potentiality is kind of the path aspect, and freedom is kind of the goal aspect.
Miriam.
Yeah, I wanted to say from this chapter, what I think first of all, the Nyams were helpful to me to kind of relate my practice to the flowing of a river. And I thought, yeah, tonight was really like a very rocky bed with, choppy waters. And so the analogy was helpful in helping create another image for the practice rather than, oh, you got carried away by your thoughts, there's a lot of energy there, blah blah blah. No, it's just this kind of experience. And I think that the most important message of the whole chapter for me is that of the transcendental watcher, because it's the only constant. And it is, I think, being able to return to that, even for a couple of seconds, is the freedom, right? Not holding on to experience, not judging experience, but just knowing that knowing just manifests, and I feel free there. There's no judgment. There's no, oh, I'm, should have done it this way. I'm not progressing. Why are these thoughts so intrusive? Why am I so stressed? All of that. um, yeah, and then it just goes, right? I don't know. I just find it quite liberating when it sinks in.
Yes, I agree. Doesn't it feel as if these are glimpses of what really is?
I don't ask myself what really is,
I ask
because I
myself
don't
that all
think,
the time, but people are different. But I am convinced that after everything else is stripped away, that's what will be left, just this potential from which anything can happen, and this awareness that sort of permeates it.
well, others have called it the one consciousness that is just seeking to know itself through us, through our own individual experiences. And it's like returning to that one consciousness. But that's a theoretical model, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it seems to be consistent with what you're saying. I don't know that we need in these teachings, I don't think that there's any hypothesis about that, but
I know. And you never get anywhere with those thoughts either. I spent some time studying with Gelugpas, and they spend all their time saying, no, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. But when you ask them, well, what is it? They won't tell you. It's like, yeah.
well, yeah, I'm happy with just remembering it's a passing experience on that screen, and then I become the screen rather than being in the movie on the screen.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we've used that before. So I'm just watching it, frame by frame, so to speak, but it's neutral. And there's no emotion there either, which is a relief for me.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
If I may add something quickly, the other traditional yams, the luminosity and bliss and total quiet, those I don't know that I've experienced them. I've heard a lot about them, but one thing that was reassuring was that those too will be fleeting. So it's not like I have to strive towards hoping to finally, get to that place, because it will come and go too. And so I don't know, I'm just a little more content on my path. So yeah, I thought this chapter was helpful to bring some ease and comfort.
That's good. I'd like to offer this story that there was a thin book, which unfortunately I can't remember the name of. I read it while I was traveling, and it's a little, what do you call it, like a memoir of this guy who lived a pretty typical middle class life, and he got involved with meditation, and then he got more deeply involved and really started to devote himself to it. And then he started seeking out and going to retreats in different places, and seeking a deeper and deeper experience. And he finally ends up at a place in Cambodia, which I recall was called the Meditation Center. And there, each person had a little like booth, it was the way he described it, sounded like a phone booth size little place where you would spend all day meditating and come out periodically for food or to walk or something. And he's meditating and meditating. And finally, one day, as he's meditating, he has this sense, this experience of thoughts receding and everything getting quieter and quieter until there was like this total stillness and just this sense of everything infused with this kind of radiant light. And he bursts out of his booth excited and goes to his meditation teacher and says, this is it. I did it. I'm enlightened. And she listened and said, okay, continue meditating. And so he goes back home and tries to get back into his life. And at the end of the book, he says, well, I was trying to understand it. And I guess what I understand is everything changes. Supposedly true story.
When David Chadwell asked Suzuki Roshi, the master of Zen Center, and David Chadwick eventually wrote a biography of Roshi. He was one of his close students. And he asked Roshi if he could sum up Buddhism in just a couple of words, few words. And didn't think that Roshi was going to respond. We thought it was maybe a silly question. And Roshi responded, everything changes.
Yeah, we just touched on that in this chapter. He mentions impermanence, which is, the realization of impermanence it's really something. Here comes Carolyn again. Welcome back. Yes, Paul.
So I have a question. I was curious because I practiced TM for a long time, transcendental via Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I was wondering if anybody in the group has ever taken that instruction.
I thought about it, but when I realized that they were asking for money, I decided not to. It's like to get a teacher for transcendental meditation, you have to pay up front or something. And
Yeah.
all the models, yeah. And I thought, okay, there's something not quite right here. Or I just didn't trust it with that kind of framework. But I know a lot of people who swear by it. The thing is, you can't get your mantra unless you commit to.
There's a whole thing to it. When I took it, it was $150. It's gone up to 3,000 or something like that. And there are advanced techniques in it, and that costs money also. I was just really curious if anybody else has had the experience. And some time ago, I've been in and out of it for many years. I practice it, and I go to Zen practice, and wherever I felt a need. And something I just observed or had the realization tonight was that one of the experiences of TM is this experience of transcending. And they sort of say you will definitely transcend at the end of your instruction. You will feel the experience of transcending. And you're talking about the niyams. This has just been a period of many, many years of experience and sometimes craving for that experience, which was it's a beautiful experience. It's a lovely experience. I don't have the thoughts that I used to have, I have a lot more shamatha from shamatha practice. But many years I craved that experience, and I recognize it's almost like an addiction for me. And this practice is so different. And then with this reading tonight, which I didn't get to read, and I'm going to have to read this chapter, it's so beyond. It places the Vipassana is so much more beyond the experience of the shamatha experience, or although it's part of it, as you've said, John, but it's something I got stuck in it, so stuck in this experience all the time. I still have a need to do it because it just releases so much stress. It's better than taking a drink or doing something compulsive. It really is helpful, but this chapter is just so beautiful that I've become aware of this, and I appreciate it. It's such a realization, I guess, from what I've been experiencing over the years.
What you're talking about are what are called the dhyanas in Sanskrit. And in the Southeast Asian tradition, they call them the jhanas. That's the Pali. When Barry or Philip was talking about, there are teachers, great teachers, who go find yogis who have gotten stuck in a particular mental state in a cave. Maybe they're frozen in yoga posture. For what they're talking about is people who have, you see, there are in samsara in Buddhism, there are 3 worlds, they're called. The first one is the world of the 6 realms, and that's what we inhabit. We're all human beings here, and our psychologies will be in those 6 realms too. Above that are 2 more worlds, which are purely mental places that are achieved or entered into through practice of concentration. And they each have 4 levels. The first one is called the realm of pure form. And I can't remember what the 4 levels are. And the second one is called the formless realm. And all I remember is that the second level is meditation on pure consciousness. The third level is meditation on not this and not that. And the fourth level is meditation on not this and not that. That's the way they tell it. And these are trance states. Trance states means that the yogi's concentration and focus is uninterrupted for long periods of time. And they take years or a lot of effort and work to develop. And Buddhists give endless warnings about them because they are still within the 3 realms of samsara, of confusion. They aren't enlightenment. And anything that is created like that will wear out. And so a person can achieve a high level of trance and enjoy bliss for long periods of time. They say, and this, you can take this as you will, that the body can completely wither away until all that's left, as they say in the text, is a palpitating heart. And the person is still in this trance state until one day, like all things that are created, it wears out. And at that point, the person wakes up, realizes that they weren't enlightened, that they were in a temporary state, and the disappointment can be very intense and can actually plunge them into a lower realm, a realm of fear, hatred, unhappiness. So the trance states are not recommended. getting these very blissful states. It's very useful to learn how to focus your mind one pointedly on an object. That's foundational in Buddhist practice too. But not carrying it to the extreme of it becoming a pleasurable and long-term occupation from the Buddhist perspective. This is like a disparity between Buddhism and Hinduism here. I mean, when I first started meditating, I was meditating in a Hindu context. I was meditating at the Ramana Maharshi ashram in New York City on East 6th Street with Bhakta Bhagavat. He was a retired UN worker who was very devoted to Ramana Maharshi, and we went in there every night and did one pointed focus, on mantra. But then I met Trungpa Rinpoche, and he taught this other. Now Trungpa Rinpoche never spent much time talking down Hindu meditation. He just didn't do that. But I asked him once, I said, is it ever useful to practice the jhanas? And he said, yes. And he said, but only after you've understood, you have developed an excellent understanding of shunyata, of reality, what reality is. And then I said, well, why would you do it? What's the purpose? And he said, to develop flexibility of mind. And I understood by that within the context of what he meant was so that you could understand all the possibilities of what other, confused sentient beings can experience and where they can go so that you can help them. In the wheel of life, they show the 6 realms, and in every realm there is a Muni, a Buddha, there to help those beings. And that's one of they're there to, in the formless realms too, form and formless realms. So they're there to help those beings. Enlightened people go there. And that's why he said you would want to understand, maybe experience the dhyanas. So.
Carolyn?
You're muted, Carolyn.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Briefly, how I was a healing medium for many, many years, went into trance all the time, and I understand referring to it as addiction. I would do anything to get out of feeling my body being in this world. So I would go into trance. I would do psychic readings for people. And it was an addiction. And I am so well now that I meditate in my body.
You're a living example of just what these teachings say. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
But don't you feel lighter?
I feel lighter because I feel something. When I went into trance, I went out the top of my head and I felt nothing. I got images. If I got further back, it was bliss. And there was a medium, I think out of Toronto, who worked for the 400, Forbes 500, the richest people in the world. He worked for people in corporations like that. And he got, like, in the 70s, he got $5,000 an hour. And he was good. Apparently he was good. But his handlers didn't keep him sane. So you could see pictures of him towards the end of his life where his head was kind of huge, and his body had disintegrated. His body was like this big. It's one of the things that my spiritual teacher did was teach us how powerful trance is and to not mess with it, because it can kill you, it can make you crazy. So this is better.
Okay. I see that Fred has a hand up, but I'm wondering if anybody else who hasn't spoken might have a question or a comment.
So I guess Fred will be the last.
Okay, Fred, you got it. Take us out.
All right. Well, I wish I had something better to end with than this, but it's reminding me of, these temporary experiences, right? And then coming down from, Chogyam Trungpa would talk about enlightenment being ego's ultimate disappointment.
You're asking or are you saying?
Saying it. It's, I've had some blissful experiences, right? And then you come back, kids are screaming, dog pooped on the floor, right? And it's like, oh, I thought I was beyond this, but no, yeah, and that's usually what comes up when I see it, Barry, like the humor of it, and it's like, oh yeah, it's a big letdown. It's like a joke that we get let into.
Thank you. Well, I'll put the chants up. Sarah, do you want to lead the closing chant? I'll mute all.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks.
Thank you. So Sarah, unmute yourself.
We will close with a prayer for peace, and then by dedicating the merit generated by our practice and our study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times, and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigton's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Philip.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh,
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.